All right. Hello and welcome. For anybody who doesn't know me, I'm Nikki Gonzalez-Shen, and I am chairing this board committee on student success and accreditation. Welcome back. We can just get a quick go around of people introducing themselves, just so everybody knows everybody. You want to start?
Sure. Leslie Blakey, Laney Faculty Senate President and biology instructor.
Francisco Herrera, Associate Vice Chancellor of Institutional Research for the district.
Mark Johnson,
Go ahead, Mark.
Executive Director, Marketing, Communication, and Public Relations for the district. And I'll introduce Bindi Illness, who does not have a microphone. She's here doing audio mix for the session. And we have Joe Sullivan, who's doing the camera work in the back production closet.
Great. Thank you, Bindi and Joe. And online, we've got, who do we have online? I cannot get my Zoom account to work, so I'm just going to ignore it.
Dr. Joker is online, and we do have President Besakoff as an attendee.
All
And then
right.
we have one more.
Also online.
My apologies, Jamil Tier. I apologize. I'm sorry. I'm
No
looking
problem.
at two things at the same time.
All right. Well, welcome. Are people comfortable with first names here? I would feel way more comfortable with dispensing with the trustee this and president that, if that works for people.
I'm Deanna Delphine Polk. I'm president of the board.
Thank you.
You can call me Deanna.
Okay. It seems to me that we need to approve the agenda. Do I see a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
All right. With no objections. Waiting for objections. We'll just say by unanimous consent, we approve the agenda. Are there any objections? All right, by unanimous consent.
Actually, Nikki,
Yes.
I realized at our last meeting, we asked, or I believe you asked for a update on our research efforts across the district. And so
Yes.
Francisco is here. And I don't see that on the agenda, which is
I'm
probably.
going to tuck that into the item of priorities.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Yeah, so we have two main things. One is a board charge and one is priorities. And what I'd like to do is actually reverse that conversation and talk about priorities, and then out of that figure out, all right, how does that fit with a board charge? Is that all right if we do it that way? Sure. Okay.
And
So
Trustee Ewan, I apologize. I just wanted to confirm, who was the second vote? Was that Jamil Tier or Leslie Blackie?
Sorry, that was Leslie.
Thank
Blackie.
you. I appreciate that. Sorry.
thank you. Okay, so I'd like to jump in on a discussion of priorities. And I had thought that a useful way of having this conversation would first be to have a discussion about what it means, what student success means when we talk about student success. I'm going to put aside the issue of accreditation for a little bit and focus on, because for the moment, we're good on accreditation. I don't think we need to take any particular action right now. I'd like to come back to that at a future meeting. But if we can focus on the issues of student success and first talk about what it is that we're talking about, and then I'd like to have a discussion about what it is that we think is getting in the way of that. And that's where I think Francisco will be helpful as we look at what is institutional research telling us, and then what is our community perspective tell us, what is our faculty classroom perspective tell us, what does our staff perspective tell us about kind of what's in the way. But I think as a starting place, I'd like to do a go round to have people kind of chime in, and maybe we can spend about 20 minutes on this part, and then we'll just redo a time check on that. And Jamil and Stephanie, I don't have a Zoom screen up for you all, so I can't see whether your hands are up. Is it possible to get one of these screens as a Zoom screen? Is that a?
I can let you know, Trustee Ewan, when their hands are up.
All right, thank you.
No problem.
So I'd like to just sort of try to do a go around on this. And so we can just initially and hello, President Beskoff. Thank you. It's good to see you, Rudy.
Thank you. Good to see everyone as well.
If we can do a go round with one thought first, because probably you got like 5 or 6, and then we'll just keep going around. And then we could see whether we have some consensus about what do we even mean by student success? Our student appointee is not here, right? Not yet. Has somebody reached out to her to see whether she's coming?
Are you referring to Nate? She's not coming. She's not able to attend this meeting.
All right. And this is why alternates would be really, really good. So, Jamil, could you start in when you think about student success? What's one thing that comes to mind as if you were to try to define it and then begin to measure it?
Yeah, I can start. Good afternoon, everyone. So I think the first thing that comes to mind for me when I think of student success, in terms of, as an employee of the district, is that I want our students to be able to come in and thrive, right? So to be able to navigate all of our systems well, to be able to get the help or resources that they need when they've got questions, and to be able to really sort of see themselves moving through Peralta in order to sort of get to, and I see we still need to approve the minutes, but in order to sort of get to what their goals are. So the lack of barriers when it comes to our students being able to navigate the system is for me sort of the first indication of like student success here.
I love that. Okay, so that's the internally focused thing. And just why don't we might get to the approval of the minutes. Let's just push to the end. And if we get to it at the next meeting, that's fine. There's nothing time sensitive about that, I don't think. Leslie, could you hop in? What's your thoughts on this?
I have many thoughts.
Okay, give me the
but,
top one.
I will try and pick a couple. And I think the biggest one is that students really need to not only, as Jamil just said, navigate the systems, getting to the door, through the door, but then really continuing on. So not only their educational success, but seeing clearly the next step in their pathway of classes to take, how they can be more successful in the systems. So.
Great, I love that. How about you, Deanna?
I also have a lot of thoughts, but I was meditating a lot on the discussion we had at our last meeting about basic needs and making sure that the students have what they need to succeed and really exploring what that looks like.
Okay. Rudy, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think obviously the primary definition I would give is, do students reach their educational goals? I think that's, and in many respects to our career and technical education programs, said goals would involve attainment or advancement in employment and sustainable employment. And I do see things such as meeting basic needs and supports as kind of the means to that goal, or to that definition of student success.
Okay. How about you, Stephanie?
See, whenever I do this, I always think of what it's not, not what it is. So I'll try to be on the positive. I've always struggled with the idea of student success in the community college because we measure it by those outcomes that are really specific. But for me by taking this class, did a student earn a higher living wage? Did they gain knowledge? Even if they didn't get the grade, did they gain knowledge that they wanted to gain? Could they land in the career that they wanted? Those are the things for me that are student success. Are they able to live their values? So.
I love these. God, this is so generative. And I want to just point out, so I'm going to call myself. Is everybody? Actually, Francisco, you spent a lot of time thinking about this. Could you please?
Absolutely. So I think from the district research side, when we're thinking of student success, we really look at it as our mission to be able to provide the Peralta community with as much information about a student outcomes, whether that's degree, attainment certificates, students transferring, and be able to provide, information to all stakeholders about how student progress is happening throughout the district and each of the colleges, and as well as providing student feedback. So whether that's through surveys or focus groups, having perspective from both not only students, but faculty and staff, and to be able to have that information both with the data we're collecting, both measurable outcomes, those metrics, as well as the faculty and student perspective, and then being able to provide that to our administrative leaderships to be able to decide where to allocate resources and to better understand what direction we should be focusing on.
Okay, I love that thought. It's a very service-oriented thought, but now put on your not research hat for just a sec, not your institutional role, like I'm here to serve the institution. But if you think substantively yourself about, well, what is student success? What do you think that is?
I agree with what others have said about students being able to attain their educational goals, whether that's a certificate, their opportunity to go to other higher institutions, or be able to their workforce goals, just knowing that the community college can serve students by providing them other life skills or just other knowledge that students can have, whether that's not necessarily work related or academic related, but also being able to have learn about any subject that they just find very useful, or just have that intellectual curiosity about. And I think that's kind of some of the value I think that community college offers.
That sounds great. Mark, can you chime in?
Yes.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity. I would agree with all of the above are really great things. And as my perspective in marketing, I think a true student success story would be an endorsement for the Peralta colleges, that the student has had such a positive experience in their classes, with the services they've received, with the environment, the welcoming environment that we offer, that they tell their friends, that they tell their families, that they spread the word on the great work that we're doing.
So they would have had such a good experience here that they would feel excited about saying other people should come here. And then that would be self-defined in very, very subjectively. So I like all of these definitions and they overlap with my own. So I'm just calling myself here for a second. Part of what I like is that there is substantive outcome, like what's happening in your life. Do you actually have a living wage? Are you housed? Are you fed, etc.? Some of it's self-definitional, like I choose my learning goals and then I meet my learning goals, or I choose my vocational or career technical goals and then I meet those. But the other part that I think, I can't remember whether it was Jamil said this, but there was this idea about, I can't remember who said it, kind of expanding your vision of that. So like if a student comes into a classroom, they may have a goal that's like, okay, I want to learn to write a grammatical sentence. And then they're assigned an extraordinary textbook. And it's like, oh my God, I didn't know about that thing. And now their vision has expanded. And so there's a role, I think, particularly for the faculty, the direct instructional faculty, but also I think counseling and so forth, where what we're doing is we're helping people open their minds in that way. And so there's a bit of a sort of a dialectical process in that regard. One thing that I notice here, though, on all these definitions, nobody said, a grade of C or better, persistence, retention, blah, blah, blah. Those might all be valuable and
Well,
certainly
technically, I
are.
said that. I just didn't use the word persistence.
But when we look at how we are measured by the SCIF, it overlaps, but it's a very sloppy overlap. And sometimes, in fact, it is at odds with how we substantively think about success. So for example, if we want to get a student across the finish line with a C or better, I know how to do that as a teacher, lower the standards. All I have to do is say, you don't have to come to class. You can do a little bit of work and I'll give you a good grade. So hang out, please pass the third week census so that we get a lot of enrollment. And then if you hang out until the end, you'll be okay. And so there's this thing about substantive learning that really does seem to be at odds with the pay for performance model that the SCIF is engaged in. And I don't really like, as a board, we have this fiduciary responsibility, blah, blah, blah. So we have to keep the dollars coming in. But it strikes me that we need to navigate that skillfully and not just toe the line like, oh yeah, ratchet up those numbers, because sometimes that's really at odds with kind of a lot of what people have said here.
I think that's such a valuable point, because one of the other things I had raised or written down to address is what the things I'm seeing with my students in the classes, and the students that aren't necessarily completing and being what we would call successful, but they have actually attempted something that they didn't think they could attempt before because of having online classes, for instance, because these people are trying to manage 2 different jobs and have families. I see the small children running around in the background, you know, or my student who locked herself in the bathroom to have the conference with me, you know, so her kids wouldn't bother her. Those are huge challenges, right? But because of the fall and spring is free, because of the online availability of modalities, because of the movement to open educational resource and low-cost textbooks, we have students who are attempting, maybe not successfully completing with C or better, but attempting things that they might not have done. And maybe it takes them a couple times, but I'll see those students the next semester like, okay, this didn't work for you. How can we set up it to be more successful for you the next time? And I think that's a hugely important issue. And maybe that's something, I don't know how we try and capture that. I'm just going to throw that down the line to you. But that I think might be a very valuable thing to look at, because it kind of does get to persistence, but it's really that idea of how have we, as you said, opened up their minds to a possibility that they hadn't thought of before. And again, it's not necessarily meeting that C or better, though my son insisted C's get degrees, and he was correct. But you know, that idea.
All right. Yeah. No, that's good.
Successful.
That's good. Jamil, I'm circling back around to you. Second round, just thoughts, new thoughts, reflection on anything anybody said.
Yeah, if I may.
Actually, I was, Deanna, let's go to you and then I'll come to you, Jamil.
So just to your point, going back to basic needs, right? Like, and making sure that we're looking at the holistic needs of the student. I think a lot of times we look at success as grades, right? Grades, and that partially is because of the SCIF. That's what we're funded for, right? But I think really going back to the base, I really thought a lot about this from our last meeting. I think it was Jamil who brought it up, actually. Looking at what the needs are of the student and figuring out what those are and how we can help them meet their goals, right? And so going back to housing, going back to childcare, that's a big thing. I remember going to class with my mom when I was a kid. And that's, you know, that's a big deal. And somehow working that into what this committee, our charge is, right, is looking at the holistic need of the student. And I'm really asking them, what do they need to be successful?
Great. Jamil, additional thoughts?
Happy to. I just also want to note that Stephanie had a hand raised. It was up for some
Oh,
time.
no, it's okay. You go ahead.
Okay, no problem. So yeah, I fully agree with everything that I've heard here. I think when we're thinking about what the student needs, I love, that I'm hearing, hey, it's goals that they maybe didn't didn't even know that they could reach for, right, or achieve, and maybe it takes them a time or two. But yeah, I think we just need to be very responsive. At least that's always my sort of practice. We need to be very responsive to what our students are looking for. I think basic needs weigh in super heavily, especially here in the Bay Area, with the price of living and the cost of food. And a lot of our students are adults and are working and do have families, and so really just keeping those types of things in mind when we're trying to figure out what's best for our student, and recognizing that our student isn't necessarily it isn't always, someone straight from high school, but there are always these other issues or these other things that come into play when trying to meet their educational goals. So even with scheduling, but I love this conversation. So yeah.
Good. I love in particular, Jamil, the notion that we've got a plurality of a whole bunch of different kinds of students, and that there isn't one definition. And so going to student self-definition of their idea of success is critical. Stephanie, round two, now additional thoughts?
So I think this has been said in a different ways, but for me, we all know, right? I remember when I was a faculty member that sometimes student success means that someone was able to walk in the door that day, that they were actually able to get to school. So for me, and I've said this publicly, it's not a secret, but I was a high school dropout. And so for me, so that I can identify that student success is actually going to a college and taking a class, let alone finishing that class. That was just over and above for me. But for me, it's kind of like what Deanna said, right? Removing those barriers, looking at the whole student, but ultimately creating a culture, creating an environment where students can thrive.
I like that. Rudy, thoughts?
Yes, just appreciating this conversation as well. I think just the space of this year, a lot of the efforts we've had. I mean, it's the word, I keep saying the words awareness campaign, that we're doing a lot of that in terms of, and I'll just give the example of financial aid. With what we attempted this year, a lot more often than one might think, students were saying financial aid, what's that? And then the other thing that was happening, and our Veterans Services Coordinator said this, was that a lot of students, for example, veterans, what she said was that a lot of them said, oh, financial aid, that's for other people to apply for. I certainly wouldn't get it if I applied. So when I think about that, and then, this Saturday at Laney, we're going to have a career and technical education open house. And to me, that's more awareness campaign, because we're not only going to have our faculty opening their doors to their classrooms and learning sites to share, but right alongside them are going to be industry partners talking about that next step, about career attainment. And I think that's something it's important. And as we kind of look at our colleges and our district, and how we are going, what guided pathways means to us, a lot of those efforts, resonate right with the tenets of guided pathways.
Mm-hmm.
And, basically, making the class path clear for students, helping them get on it, supporting them, and then assessing how we're doing, and providing professional development to our employees. I think all those things kind of interlock, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does quite a bit. Francisco, you want to add anything at this point?
I'd just like to say, I love the idea of just having more opportunities to celebrate student success in the broadest way. So, we not only like the idea of like when students are transferring or obtaining certificates, but, because ed goals are so different for our diverse student population, just having events or announcements just of different types of student success and students, how students are, obtaining whether there's events or projects or different things that students are being involved in as, as a result of being a part of the Peralta community. I think that can just go a long way of just even more outreach and more recruitment, and just, just that great messaging of why you'd want to come to Peralta.
Yeah. Mark, additional thoughts at this point? Okay. I'm going to call myself here for a second because I'm noticing that a lot of what we're talking about could be summarized in this very broad idea of the betterment of our communities. I know that sounds really extremely broad, and so I want to now put a little more flesh on the bones there. And I think part of that is when people talk about being able to get in the door and then be supported, part of that means having a community that in which we've eliminated racism. We've eliminated sexism. We have eliminated these barriers to people's self-defined experience of success. Now, this might just be a sort of a disciplinary bias, or maybe it's the bias of a political person, right? But it strikes me that if students are going to be successful by any of the measures that we've talked about, almost, we have to help them be empowered and skilled and capable of engaging in the political processes that bring about these outcomes. So part of what that means is empowering people to live in a democratic society. Now, if I look at all of these things together, it strikes me that when we are going out and then measuring it, we're not measuring these things. And it's kind of like the way economists measure the health of an economy. They look at GDP, which is a horrible measure of economic health by many standards. And so in the economics world, the interesting economists are using alternative measures of economic health, right? And I'm wondering if we actually engaged in this process as sort of a deep dive into helping students help self-define, engaging faculty and staff in this process. And we came up with this kind of a holistic model of what we meant by success. And then we went to measure it. What would we be doing? What would be the economic progress indicators, the health progress indicators, the anti-racism progress indicators that we would then look at and then tie to the specific community college environment? What in fact we would look like. Okay, last thing I'm going to say on this regard is, so I'm at APAHE right now, Asian Pacific Americans in Higher Education. It's meeting over at the Marriott in downtown, fabulous gathering. And last night I was talking to some people in the pre-conference meeting, among whom were some people from the state chancellor's office. And we've got a new state chancellor. And so I think all bets are off. I don't think there's any big surprise that I was not a big fan of Eloy. He's gone though. And so that doesn't matter. And now we've got a new chancellor and I think a potential for a fresh start. When I was asking a couple people out of state chancellor's office, when you look at student success and you look at the SCIF and you look at your equity and anti-racism goals, et cetera, could you point to one college in the system out of the 116 bona fide colleges that we have, 117 if you include their failure? I did say that, that was bad. But if you look at if you look at the entire system, is there a college you would look at and point to and say, yes, they've got it, they're doing it well? And the answer was no. And so it strikes me that, in fact, even by the definitions that the legislature has imposed on us, vis-a-vis Lumina and Gates foundations and their flavor of the month reform, Nobody knows what they're doing. Nobody has the answer to student success, even by the definitions that they are putting out: persistence, retention, closing those equity gaps. And so I think as we think about charge, maybe part of what the charge here is not only to inform the board on policy, but to inform the board on advocacy. That is, we don't have to be passive players in this idea about what student success is. It seems to me that if we had this conversation among any thoughtful, reflective, non-defensive person who could engage curiously in this thing, we'd come up with a similar list and then we'd start over. And I think in some ways that would be going back to the old model of FTES. Like, all right, look, you've got people there, you all figure it out. How do you all define success? And if you can get people coming back, then that's kind of like what Mark, you were just saying, like if people could do an endorsement of these colleges, how would they do it? Well, they'd spread the word. And if you had people coming here because this was the cool happening place to be, then that would be your measure. I think we need to be engaging in a reformulation of success at the state level because we're locked into these formulas that are killing us. I don't know, that's my thought. I want to now just sort of open this up, and then in a little bit, let's shift to board charge, but let's keep talking about success. Leslie?
Yeah, so one thing I wanted to let people know, because you may not be aware of this, but we actually have right now a Peralta online conference that is happening. Lots of people are attending it, but we have an online equity rubric that we at Peralta developed and really worked very hard on doing with our online classes because of pandemic. And that has actually filtered up to the state and is now being used as the rubric for people to look at equity and issues of equity. So when you talk about things like awareness of support, navigating, being able to see themselves, one of the things that we're trying to do in the classroom is to look at how do you look at your implicit bias as you're teaching? How do you make sure you have diverse images in your classes? And you can find that in a lot of places. I teach biology, and yet I am able to find those images, even though really science is based on white European textbooks, really. I mean, that's where it's a Eurocentric science, but so you have to work very hard to bring that into the classroom, but not as hard as you think. I mean, it was pretty straightforward to do it from my online and then pull that into my face-to-face. So it is happening in the classroom. And I think we're really encouraging our faculty to try and do that in the classroom. So then I think the next step is, because I tend to think very much in kind of my tactical operational as opposed to strategic level, is like, how do we bring that success from that very specific within the classrooms, which I think is, of course, as a faculty member, hugely important, but how do we bring that up? And how do we then, as you said, look at what we can do at the state level and look at how to evaluate it? But I do think we have to trumpet our successes, because Peralta is, I think, really leading the charge on a lot of those areas. And it came out of this whole earthquake of teaching of online and because of the pandemic. So what are the lessons that we can do to take forward? But I do think that we are trying to have, not all classes, but we're trying to do it in a variety of classes to help students see themselves not only successful in the class, in the college, but then what can you do to take that advocacy forward, whether it's nutrition or medical care or political science or it's treating each other nicely, right? So so I would hope that we could try and look at that this committee could look at what are we already doing successfully within our colleges, and then expand that up to a strategic level. So it's different from a top down, it's really more the bottom up, but we have done a lot of that work. So let's build on it.
I love that. Mark, you've got a hand up.
Yes, thank you. Leslie, I'm so glad that you mentioned the online equity conference that's going on. It's going on through tomorrow, so it's not too late. If you want to get you want to log in and join some sessions through tomorrow, that's still an opportunity. I wanted to just do two things regarding equity, and that's double down on the Peralta Online Equity Rubric. That is being used by the University of California system formally as one of two main drivers of their equity rubric. It's the Peralta Online Equity Rubric and the Wisconsin rubric.
Okay.
That's huge.
Yeah.
That is huge. And often it was, let's see, Dr. Siri Brown pointed out to me that California is like a 3-tiered system for a college education. You have the community colleges, you have the Cal State system, and you have the UC system. And a lot of time the faculty at community colleges are looked down upon because they're instructors, they're not involved in research. Well, at Peralta, we put that expertise in teaching into practice with the online equity rubric. We were ahead of our research-oriented sister systems because instruction is so important. And I just think that thought leadership that came from community colleges, and particularly the Peralta Community College District, is really important to highlight. The other equity flag, Nikki, when you were talking about extending to like political activism and the different groups that are involved, it made me think that I'll try and channel Chancellor Jackson a little bit. This is her favorite time of the year. Graduation season is absolutely her favorite time of the year. It's an opportunity for the students to get together with their fellow students, their family members, and their community to celebrate their achievements, whether it's a diploma or a certificate or a better paying job. We have the 4 college graduations, but we also have the African and African American graduation ceremony. We have the Raíces Latinx celebration, and coming up early next week for the first time is the Lavender Project and the Peralta Community College district-wide celebration for LGBTQIA+. That's super exciting. But if I can put a little asterisk on the excitement, it's also in a way a little sad. The team that is here providing AV support is going to be recording all of these graduation ceremonies, except for the Lavender Project. And I reached out to ask if we could record that, but there are members of our community that will be participating in that event who are not out yet.
Yeah.
And having their image put on the Peralta YouTube channel would not be good for those individuals. And that just makes me sad that we live in a society that marginalizes people that way. But I am so thrilled that we have the Lavender celebration coming up. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's great. Part of the challenge of running this meeting in this room is that we don't have whiteboards. We don't have, they're like, if I were doing this really as a functional committee meeting, we'd be working with sticky notes and whiteboards, and we'd have put up all these ideas so that it wasn't just up to us individually trying to keep notes and figure them out, but everybody's idea would be honored by just having it there. But so I'm gonna just try to recap, and if I missed something, sorry, my note taking wasn't fast enough. But as I'm looking at how people have talked about student success, a lot of it has to do with their own self-vision. They're being able to just get into the system, get to class, and then navigate that system. Then being able to find the next path, the next step in that path, having their very basic needs met as a measure of, not only as a path to success, but as a measure of success. Part of that is, Stephanie, you talked about like a higher living wage, an actual living wage, but then also being able to expand their ideas of of knowledge, gain knowledge. Stephanie, you said something about living their values, which I thought was really critical. Leslie, you said attempting something new. And I remember something that Lewis said the other night at a board meeting. He said he was a person who really believed in being able to fail and then learning from that failure. And that's kind of what I was thinking there. It's like, try something you haven't tried that's not your domain, and just play in that regard. And then Jamil, you said a couple times here something that I think is really critical, and it's being responsive to the students' own needs and goals, and then understanding that we have a diversity of students, that's not all just one thing. There are probably a few others that I'm missing, but if we take that as a starting place and then add on to that the traditional metrics of persistence, closing equity gaps, and then passing class. Add on to that, then, doubling down on the idea that we're an educational institution and they come away with skills and knowledge, capacity for learning. If we then asked ourselves, do you have a top sense of like, what's in the way of that? What's getting in our way of student success? What's in the way of the students being successful? If we can do a quick round or two or three on that question from your own experience, insight, analysis, research, whatever it is, what's in the way? What do we think? Deanna, can you start?
Yeah. Just thinking about my time as a student, what was in the way for me was money. Having the basic living wage, getting a job that would fit with my class schedule, and figuring out resources. That was another big thing because I didn't know what I was doing. I went from a dual enrollment student to a traditional student, and that was it. I didn't know what was available to me. Those are just the two things that came to mind.
So part of it was you needed the money, but part of it was you were lost in the system.
I felt lost in the system. Yeah.
Didn't know how to access the basic things
Right.
that you might need.
Yep.
All right, fair enough. Stephanie, you have a thought on this?
Yeah, mine's along the same line. I think also our home situation can be overwhelming. And sometimes there isn't a college going culture. I want to go, someone said vision, like to be able to, I don't remember who said this when we were talking about student success. They talked about being able to vision something else. One of the things that I think Peralta has to do is we've got a pretty robust dual enrollment, but we're focusing on dual enrollment for students that would probably already go to college. I want to step back into the middle schools. I want to get them earlier because I think being able to envision ourselves on a college, at a campus, what college looks like. If we can't imagine it, we can't do it. And so for me, those kind of are two different things, right? There's the overwhelming things of life, whether that's money, resources, and then, like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And then there's the other part is, what do we have the imagination to see something that we've never seen before?
Yeah. My mind is firing, that's all. Jamil?
I think my mind is firing too. I think my perspective is based largely on my experience. My experience sounds a lot like what Stephanie talked about and what Deanna talked about. So when I was a college student, money, right, was the very first issue that I had to figure out. How am I getting to class? Do I have bus fare? Can I catch a ride with someone? Yeah, how am I going to afford my textbooks? If I'm there all day, am I going to be able to eat? Do I need to pack a lunch? So a lot of those are the basic needs that we can't kind of keep coming back to. But one of the other things that I had real trouble with is sort of finding my place and sort of seeing myself on campus. So I think folks just need to be able to see themselves. And again, that goes back to that vision. And if I had had it earlier, I think it might have been easier to transition. But I think folks need to be able to find community if there isn't, especially if there isn't sort of a history of maybe family attending college and they're not really sure, right? So for me, it was the navigation. How do I get this thing? I found out about tutoring. I think it was like the last semester of my second year, and I was like, wait, it's free. I could have had this help the whole time, right? So the struggle was there. So I think the navigation and finding community, because if you find community early, then you start to understand what resources are available, and you start to be able to see yourself in a place where you otherwise might not.
This is so generative. Rudy?
Probably my response is going to be it's going to fly on a different zone, I think, but here goes. A lot of the things that we talk about to support students and to address issues of equity, to address basic needs, to look at things like associated costs of college. When we do a lot of those efforts, those conversations always begin with looking at what one-time money is available to support students. It shouldn't be that way. There should be things that come out of the, and I guess this is because I heard the question of advocacy earlier. We need to find a way so that things like that are part of college funding through its general fund, in my opinion. And I think that that's something that when we do that, that means that we're making a commitment to that, so that things such as Dr. Droker mentioned about, promoting this idea of college while students are in middle school, it's not an initiative. It's a way of doing business as a college. And I think, just having to hold our breath every year to see what's coming in special funds, in a lot of ways it promotes innovation, but in a lot of other ways it prevents institutionalization of things that should be institutional, if that makes any sense. And anyway, I'll stop there.
Yeah, I'm sorry you stopped there, because that was actually also, I don't think you're in the wrong, in a different track, Rudy. I think that's actually right in the mainstream of this conversation. Leslie, do you want to come back in, and then I'll call on myself?
Yes. So I have a couple different things. One, again, and I tend to focus more like the specifics and what we can do in the classroom. So we've heard several times about not even knowing what the resources are that are available. And this is something that, again, I think we can encourage that information at the students from the faculty. So many faculty put resources in their Canvas pages so that they're in their Canvas shells so that the students can see it. Now, maybe they don't see it in my class, but maybe if they're taking 3 or 4 classes and they end up seeing it, oh yeah, it was in Dr. Blakey's class, and oh, now here it is in my English class, and now here it is here, that idea of accessing resources. We've had pre-pandemic, the biology department at Laney, we used to run monthly lunchtime sessions where we would bring in campus resources from around the college and have them specifically talking in our biology quad. So again, having that example, and those things came out of folks who were more trained in the teaching pedagogy of how do we get students to understand all the resources than me. I mean, I have a PhD, right? I was good at school. I went to school and I just kept going to school. And then I started teaching in a school, right? So I don't understand why the calendar starts in January. That makes no sense, right? It always starts end of summer. But that's a sidebar. But that idea of supporting the faculty in the professional development of how to really support students who didn't learn the same way you learned, who come from a different background. Because as people said, many people came from ideas of not ever having heard of college, whereas my dad was a professor of medicine. It was always I grew up in Davis, right? It's a company town, a university. So I grew up with that expectation of going to college and understanding where to find those resources. So when we have faculty that grew up with that, they need to learn how to support the students who didn't get that. And again, it's not, it goes to that implicit bias. It's not that you are trying to leave people out, you just weren't aware of how to support it. So how do we, again, as part of student success and equity, really build that into all our classes, into our colleges? How do we really develop that navigating of college? Who knows, maybe it's a freshman success class that we try and develop, or something, right? That is, again, a very concrete example to try and start building from the ground up for getting that supportive resources, that people know how to access those resources, and that faculty are very much supported in learning how to explain those things. And our student services folks, who I think do a better job of the warm handoff than faculty. We tend to go to admissions and records, and then you do this, and whereas other services on the campuses, certainly pre-pandemic, did a much better job of let me walk you to where you're supposed to be, right? And so I think, again, learning those issues. So that's one thing that's positive. I do want to bring out a negative. Rudy's like, of course, Leslie's bringing out a negative, which is that I think we as a district need to get better at clear communication. So, we don't understand really what the mask mandate's going to be for next fall. I mean, all around us, the world has said, okay, we're not wearing masks, but we haven't come up with that decision yet for our students to enroll. Students are enrolling now, but they're looking at something that we're different. We're not really following the science from all the campuses around us, right?
Yeah.
So what is that? What is the vaccination policy? We say we expect proof of vaccination, but that's put on the faculty. And then there's this, or do they do it? And again, confusion about these things. And
But communication was your main
these, right.
point.
So these are communication issues that I think right now is critical, right? Because we are coming out of pandemic. But I think it's also something, if we look at our history as a district, I don't think we communicate as well as we could. No fault of Mark, no fault of the hardworking people who are trying to keep up websites and things, but I just think we have not communicated with clarity. And I think that is something that we really need to work on. And I don't know if that's the charge of this committee, but it is something that maybe every committee needs to work on. How do we communicate better to make sure we're not losing things to the cracks?
Great.
Vicky?
Welcome, Natay.
Yeah, thank you.
Natay, really glad to have you. We're in the middle of a very fruitful discussion where we started talking about what do we mean by success, and then went on to, and there was a really kind of broad discussion about success that encompassed everything from students having basic needs met to students being able to live their values, pursue their educational goals, expand their vision of who they are and what they're interested in, take risks, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the things that we just noted was that our internal visions of success don't line up very neatly with the external measures from the state that are critical to our funding. They overlap, but they're not anything close to a perfect fit. And then we're having this discussion about what are the things that seem to be getting in the way of students being successful even by their own measure or by the measures that we've got here. Do you have thoughts on either of those you'd like to just jump in with for a moment? What does success mean, do you think? And then we can get to the second question. What do you think might be getting in the way if you look at the top one or two?
Just like you stated, success is broad. It really depends on what that person's values and what they are trying to obtain, especially as a student and in their upcoming career. It just really depends on what that person is looking forward to. I like for success for me is to be able to graduate and to be able to find a good paying job where I can be able to support my family. That's, my basic, like my success story for myself. But it could be any student just really trying to either find themselves, even to the point of just trying to, look into something different, a different career, a different pathway. It just depends.
Mm-hmm. And do you have a sense of the main thing that seems to be in the way of students being successful by the way you think about success? And I know that's shaping it in the negative rather than what are the things that are being helpful, but so be it. Either question was a useful one.
As far as success, I don't really know what would be standing in their way. Again, it could be yourself personally. It could be finances. It could be housing. It could be all the basic things that we need as just human beings.
Yeah.
Even a self-image could keep us back from what we want to do. But as far as school is concerned, I think it's the fact that sometimes we're not challenging ourselves enough to really go beyond what we see and what we have in front of us.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the main issues where Peralta could help. I believe that if we are more forward with things that are around us, what the services and programs that we have at each college, if we could put that at the forefront, it would help a lot because a lot of students don't know where programs we have that are at the basic core. I feel that if we do that, it gives us a little more value with our students and lets them know that they can be successful if they're willing to go the distance.
Great. So it's 3:00. We go till 3:30 technically, right?
Yes.
Okay, good. So there's a lot on the plate here. And I'm noticing that some of these things are long-term structural changes, and some of them are things that we can actually do something about sooner. So the long-term things, Rudy, you mentioned, I think basically, is Rudy still on? I think we lost Rudy.
He had to leave, Nikki.
Yeah. So, Rudy talked about the fact that sometimes we just get this one-time money to engage in these kind of massive sorts of changes, where what we really need is changes in the way that the financial aid formulas are done and the way that school funding is done, to take into consideration a lot of these just baseline things. And without those changes, we're going to struggle very mightily to help students be successful. So in terms of statewide advocacy, that's got to be something that we line up with SSCCC on, and really be pushing for that financial aid reforms is one thing. Second thing, I think it's worth noting, look, there's so many things that are broken in this district, basic stuff like hot water and cosmetology, or, can you get an up-to-date financial aid report and make sure that the Department of Ed is satisfied with it? You know, there are those basic things. But then it strikes me that a lot of the things that we're talking about, if we could come to some agreement on prioritizing, we actually have a lot of resource that's being untapped. And Leslie, you mentioned right off curriculum. So imagine that if there were, I'm just making this up, right? And I'm a board member and we don't mess with curriculum. This is your domain. So this is just me speculating. Real clear about this, okay? I'm not messing with your 10+1, although I am. It seems to me that most of our resources in this district are tied up in curriculum.
Yeah.
And when I say tied up, I don't mean a bad thing, are dedicated, invested in curriculum. So if we could, as a district, have a more common shared vision of what it meant to be successful and how we might get there, what if we did curriculum infusion work? So that regardless of what you were teaching, you were thinking through, here are the basic things that are in the way of the vast majority of our students being successful. So, and then figure out within your domain, how do you teach to that? And how do you ameliorate those problems? And that would be up to the creativity of the faculty member to figure that out in you know, collaboration with colleagues. But it seems to me that if we could bend the curriculum in this direction, we'd have a lot more resource to play with. Then there's some other things that we should probably figure out how to prioritize. If in fact basic needs are critical, let's list those out and then figure out what the low-hanging fruit is. So can we have functioning communications about food pantries? And then make sure that food pantries are accessible, not stigmatized, you know, Stephanie, you talked about a culture of going to college. And if we could have a culture of success in that broad way around food, transit, lifelong learning, community support, et cetera, if we could have that as a deeper ongoing discussion that the board could be involved with and set policy goals around and then policy objectives around, I think what would happen is, and this is just me thinking out loud, that we'd get better universal buy-in. And then where we were successful, we'd know about it. And where we were failing, we wouldn't point fingers at each other and say, you didn't do this. But we could say, we didn't meet this. But that would require a different culture of discussion. One last thought I have is, seems to me a lot of times we get presentations from the athletic teams, particularly at Laney, and they talk about their success in helping their athletes be successful and transfer. And they kind of have a wraparound vision of this. Now, those students are super motivated because if they don't succeed in the classroom, they don't play. But then they're also supported with a bunch of other stuff. And that might be just one model. Let's take a 2-minute stand and stretch. Just clear the brains. Can we? 2-minute stand and stretch. I know I've been sitting for way too long.
We gonna hear from Francisco?
Yeah, let's pivot to that. Thank you. That's a really good question. So as long as we're taking a 2-minute pretend break, we'll stand and stretch and I'll pretend we're taking a break while we're working. What's the part of what you're all? That's the question I'm gonna.
I've just been thinking about that. We might have to just obvious. And then we might have some stuff like, well, if I were at the researcher at the town, this is what I might do. Now, of course, you don't feel that to be, you're really clear about that. But we can have a discussion with Chancellor and board.
Yeah.
About what we do. So, you know, feel free to research your brain.
I teach biology, the founder of the PCTV program, the biomanufacturing at Laney. So I wear two hats over my
Okay.
science, and my CPD hat.
Are you
I
tied in
love
with the
that.
genomics stuff that?
That's up at Merritt.
They're
That's
doing
much
at
more
Merritt
Merritt.
and then over in Alameda.
That's more at Merritt. All of the various biomanufacturing folks, biotech biomanufacturing at BCC, Laney, and Merritt, we're actually pretty close, and we've all supported each other. We do
Yeah.
different parts because it's a ginormous time.
Yeah.
So we do different aspects of it.
Yeah. Is that what's getting built out at the waterfront in Berkeley? Biotech manufacturing and research?
There's a lot.
You know, there's that football sized, 5 times football sized field right at the waterfront. You know what I'm talking about?
exactly what you're
Yeah,
talking
there's a lot of synthetic biology and a lot of food biotech happening.
It seems to me that that's a biotech research,
I think it might be.
research park or something like that.
There's a lot of biotech research parks right now over in South San Francisco, so they're trying to get someone.
Wow, there gotta be 1 billion jobs going there.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the discussion, right?
We're working on it.
Yeah. Okay, coming back. That was our 2 minutes of pretend break. Francisco, as you think about what you're doing in your office, what's the research that you're already doing that can inform this discussion? And then if you had like an unlimited budget and a massive research team of crack academics, you know, what would you be doing that would help inform this discussion?
Nikki, may I
Yes.
also ask that Francisco, because the colleges also have researchers that are not part of the district, and I think Francisco also talked to them so you could get a broad
Yeah,
understanding
so
about everything
any
that's
and
going on.
all, any and all going on in the district. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Stroker.
Yeah, absolutely. Just kind of picking up where we're talking about greater awareness for the services and basic needs. You know, that is something, you know, being at the research office, that is something that the state is asking us about information about collecting that. And they're asking us if we have basic needs centers at the colleges. I believe BCC does have a basic needs center. I'm not sure of the other ones, but that's what we're hearing. And they're not necessarily asking us to provide specific data about how many students are using the food pantry, for example, or mental health services, but they want to know, they want us to establish basic needs centers, and they want us to be able to collect information about referrals. So they are starting to ask us, you know, if you have a basic needs center, are you referring students to the food pantry, transportation, mental health services, childcare services, technology? And so right now, that's something that's very brand new. It's not exactly tied to funding yet, but our understanding is that very much is going to be part of funding going forward. And so that's something that I'm looking forward, because right now, although we're offering these services, we're not, at least, and I'm sure the colleges are collecting information about that, but we don't have a systematic process of collecting this information or being able to use it for tracking purposes. So I think going forward, that's something I'd like to have more discussion around, and something working with the colleges as well to begin to kind of think about how we want to establish these basic needs centers and collecting this information, because it's clearly becoming a priority for the state, and I'm sure going forward much so, and it will be tied to funding. Yeah, we are doing, talking with the other researchers. We're obviously each of the colleges have their own specific priorities and goals for each of their institutions. But we are working together on some larger district-wide reports, like our 320 apportionment report. That's something I wanted to bring up because obviously that's the charge of the district research, but we're trying to make it much more inclusive because traditionally at Peralta, the colleges haven't been as involved with the 320 about, enrollment, about collecting attendance, about how we're calculating FTS. And so going forward with our consultant, Deborah Ludford, we're going to start working and providing training with our vice presidents of instruction, with deans, with department chairs, with our schedulers. So that way everyone is better informed about what data goes into the 320 report and what data is being collected, and making sure we're all sharing best practices. So right now, that way everyone has an understanding about what is the wish factor, what's the annualizer, how are we collecting for non-credit distance education. So we just want to make sure that everyone's on the same page. And so that's why we're providing a lot of these informational sessions, and we're looking forward to doing that in the upcoming year. And again, some of the other big projects that we're doing, we're being in contact with the colleges, what data they need. We're creating more dashboards. We just finished one for our for SAS, DPS, our student accessibility services. That's a new dashboard that's providing data for all the colleges, so they have more information about the students that they're servicing. So those are kind of some of the, we're starting to work more hand in hand with the colleges, trying to get their feedback about what their priorities are and how district research can help support that going forward. And that's also goes back to, we talked about surveys and student surveys. And so we know that surveys are being done at each of the colleges. And so now we're trying to make that be more of a partnership with the colleges, so that we can get their information, and so that we're not also over surveying students, being able to take that data and be able to do more of a meta-analysis and be able to use that for district strategic priorities. So that way we're not just working in silos, but we're collecting information, and the colleges are doing focus groups. So we want to be able to have access to some of that information, because I think right now, sometimes we don't know what's happening at some of the colleges. And so some of the researchers at the colleges, they have their own research projects that sometimes we're not informed in. So we do have our monthly meetings that we gather, but we're trying to do a better job of trying to make sure that we're all informing each other of what the research projects are going forward. I'll stop there if there's any questions.
I'm wondering, when you look both at the district level and at the college level,
Yeah.
where is the bulk of the research going? What do you spend your day-to-day time? What are the studies you're looking at and trying to figure out? Is it, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Obviously, we're consumed a lot with a lot of our state mandated reporting and federal reporting. The MIS 320, IPEDS, and so on. A lot of these do take up. But when we're looking at the research, we are working with the college researchers to look more about what are some of the student preferences. We're looking at where, and we know students swirl a lot. So we're starting to look at in what areas that we're seeing students progress in, where the retention, is happening, and what in programs. And we're trying to better understand, where is our face-to-face instruction growing versus our online or hybrid? How are students doing with versus asynchronous and synchronous learning? So we're trying to start to breaking those down and trying to better understand that, not just the modalities, but between the curriculum and programs. So where is that growth? Where is the student preferences? Where are they going? And then not only in terms of the enrollment to see where students are, their preference, but also what we're hoping to see is then what are the outcomes of those? Are we seeing better outcomes in those areas? Or achievement? Is that leading to more transfer in those areas, more certificates obtained? So that's something that now we're trying to delve a little bit deeper in those areas to answer those questions.
Colleagues, questions here for Francisco on anything he said so far? This is going to sound critical,
Yes.
and I don't mean it to be, because I understand you're operating with constraints you're operating with. You're saying, well, we spend most of our time dealing with 320s and state mandates, and we're struggling to figure out student learning mode, where do they want to go so that we can offer classes correctly? Okay. And then I was thinking about our more aspirational ideas of having students have expanded imagination and vision and kind of thinking outside the box. And then I'm also thinking we've got these questions about basic student needs. We're going to capture some of that with the students that we've got, but frankly, a lot of the students that we need to be asking that question aren't here. And so we don't have an obvious way of reaching that. And I'm wondering whether there is any way to bend the research that we're doing at the college and at the district level to better understand the way that we're thinking about student needs and student success, as opposed to the way that the state is mandating us to think about it. Because I think it was pretty clear from an earlier discussion that those are very, very imperfect and sometimes completely contradictory goals. Is that a question of capacity, or is it a question of?
I think to a great degree, it is a question of capacity. Right now, there's only one dedicated college researcher at each of the colleges. I definitely think that they could use more support. At district, we support them as much as best we can, but I know it would be great for them to have greater capacity in terms of a research office. I know that's the case at other like multi-district community colleges. So that would help them to do more of that college level research than just state mandated reporting, which a lot falls on district. And so that's why we're kind of consumed by that. And that's why a lot of the outcomes we're looking is directly related to the SCIF.
Yeah, Leslie?
So one of my questions that arises was when we start looking at the data that, and again, it gets to this definition of different levels of success, right? So when we look at people who attempt online classes, they tend to have a 50% success rate, basically, of completing with a C or better, as opposed to the students who are in the face-to-face. The hybrid classes are fully face-to-face. So that has been using some of the information then from IR. There's been a real push to drive more face-to-face classes because often we get 70 or 80% success of the students completing it. But we also know that those classes are dramatically lower enrolled right now. And so when we try and use statistics from over here saying, look, all these students, because we're student-centered funding formula and we need students to complete, we're seeing that we shouldn't offer online classes, but then we are funded from enrollment, which we do get higher enrollments from FTE. And so that's, again, one of those difficulties, because it's like, which part of the data are we going to be looking at, right? Are we looking at our successes or our enrollment numbers? And so I don't know the question to ask that
Can
would
I
be
put that
successful.
question on?
Let me
Okay,
finish. I don't know the question to
Yes,
ask
right.
that would help us generate the way to pull the data out that would then support what we're trying to do here on this committee. But I think it does get to the problem that we were talking about the student-centered funding formula and the student successes that we're trying to do, which is the wraparound basic needs, because
Yeah.
we're not really funded on those basic needs yet. You said it might happen. So I just throw that out for maybe the brain trust here that could come up with a better question that would be able to generate this kind of data to help us come up with a policy to be student successful, but also help with our student-centered funding formula and our FTEs.
Yes, I
which
think
seems
that's right. the
diametrically
odds, and
opposed.
Yeah, you hope it's not. Yes, exactly. And so even though, yes, we, even from, if we're thinking of priorities from the state, obviously we do get more funding and make more money, the more face-to-face and the more synchronous. So, but that's, is that always the best value for the curriculum or for the student? So we don't want to just, you're right, just if we're just focused on funding and getting more apportionment, we would say increase all face-to-face, increase only synchronous, as opposed to like fully online synchronous. So it's, but I agree with you that we shouldn't allow that to just dictate, what we're offering to our students. So we definitely need to take that into consideration.
I have a hypothesis about research that I think might encompass a lot of what we've been discussing about in terms of understanding success and the barriers to success. It seems to me that when we've looked at the barriers to success, what I'm hearing repeatedly is people have a hard time making time to be successful because they don't have food, they have to work too many hours, they don't have transportation, they're trying to get to and from. And so I think a critical question that we could study would be, how are students spending their time? Like, if you look at who's here full-time, who's here part-time, and who's not here, or who left. And if we could do a time use study, what are you actually putting in to food prep, shopping, finding food? How many hours you actually putting into work, et cetera? And then I think a critical question would then also be, how much time are you putting into actually studying? Now, a corollary question, Leslie, that I think the Academic Senate could do all on its own is, how much time do you expect a student to study? For the curriculum you have.
The curriculum you have, it states in the curriculum course outline of record that
But
there are
that's not-
2 hours outside for every 1 hour inside.
So go and
Class.
do an actual study of what your colleagues and you actually think their students are going to put in, not what is the official, but the actual. Because I think you will find that the actual is dramatically smaller than what is expected by that typical, 2 to 3 hours per classroom hour. For the online students, they're thinking that every hour counts and that they don't have to count their baseline 3 hours or 4 hours of units, et cetera.
Correct. That is hidden time that when they sat in class and a face-to-face class that they didn't count, and that online students are already there. So that does get to that point of like, how do we do the time? But again, that's one reason why students are saying that they're taking, when we do ask, because many of my colleagues have asked this across disciplines, why are you taking online asynchronous classes? It's because they can then fit it around the 2 jobs, the childcare, the dropping off the kid, the being at their soccer practice or whatever. And so this is one reason why what we're hearing, because many of us have run these since pandemic, because when it started, when in March 2020, everybody just wanted to get back to the way it was. And then of course, it's not the way it was. It's very different. And so this is, I think, one of those issues why so many students feel more comfortable to attempt online asynchronous classes is because it works around, they think they can work it around their schedule.
So
better.
this is an empirical question.
Right.
This is something we could actually study and then look and say, all right, look at the grade, look at the persistence, look at the success. How does that then map to what their actual schedules are? How many hours are they spending doing childcare, elder care, work, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? I think we would learn quite a bit that would then be very helpful in terms of setting policy goals and then doing advocacy. Because if what you learn is, look, no matter what we do in the classroom, no matter how woke we are, no matter how multicultural we are, no matter how responsive we are, they just don't have time. That informs us. It says, all right, so if we're going to deal with this, we've got to deal with that problem as the number one. We can do all this curricular stuff. Great, we should be. But it's not going to move the metric on equity very much. It's not going to move the metric on success very much if, in fact, they can't find more time in their day to just do the underlying study. But we're not asking that question. I've never seen a study in my 30 years of teaching. I've never seen a study on this. Francisco, have you? Leslie, have you? Stephanie?
Nikki, I'm sorry to, no, the answer is no. But I just wanted to point out, we're 3 minutes out from ending the meeting.
I see that. So let's spend a moment just doing a quick go around on this question of charge. So we're board committee. Board committees at this point, and near as I know, nobody's written a charge for a board committee. And so we're kind of ad hocing it each time. But I think it would be useful to do an actual written charge. If you were writing the charge of this committee, what would be at the top of the menu in terms of the purpose of this committee is? Deanna?
I think the purpose of this committee is to help inform us as trustees. Because we're clear on what our role is, right? Like we were talking about what we can do with advocacy with regards to funding, which it sounds like a lot of the issues that we're talking about relates to funding, and that's something that we can do. This committee looking at the holistic experience of a student and what success looks like, what we want our students to be, what we want our students to look like as successful students.
Jamil?
Sure. I think building on top of what Deanna just said, the specific point of this committee and having representatives from staff, from faculty, from classified is to, or students, faculty, and classified is to be able to get sort of a perspective from each of those viewpoints, and then to see how we can come together to sort of build upon it and make the organization focus and run as a community in terms of reaching these goals.
Say that again. You can use the exact same words. I'm just going to listen more carefully.
Absolutely. So I think this committee included staff, faculty, and students, staff, and classified. I'm tongue-tied, but it included all of our different perspectives so that we could each weigh in on how to reach these goals as an organization, right? So it's not just what the board can do. It's not just what faculty can do. It's not just what students can do. It's not just what classified can do. It's how can we all come together to sort of reach these goals.
Okay, good. Thank you. Stephanie?
I don't know yet. I'm going to listen a little bit more.
Leslie?
Building off of what Jamil said, I think that the charge of this committee is to use the different voices that are representing different constituencies in the district to help the Board of Trustees direct the chancellor, who is their one employee, to develop an overall strategy to achieve the goals of improving student success.
Nate, do you have thoughts?
No, just to build off of everyone else, everyone else has said already. Basically, I believe that this is a charge that where we can all speak, have a say so into this community, so we can all better us as a community, and to be able to work together with students, faculty, staff, and the board of trustees to understand the success and needs of students, to make us more successful, to make the students be able to bring a better success to their lives and also to the district as well.
Nice,
Nikki, I would like to add one thing.
please.
As people were talking, I do think it's important that we continue to keep in mind the board goals and see if we can't align, like take the board goals in that one area. I think it's board goal 1. And it might be, as this committee is bringing information forward, it's an area of which the board can, meet that goal and continue to monitor those activities. So I would like to see it connected to that, because ultimately that connects to our educational master plans and the strategic plan. And I would like to keep it in that strategic direction. The board agendas are always really packed, and this might be a way for us to see some information that would go to the board before it does, and get some input feedback from this group. As mentioned, there's different perspectives, and then it filters up to the board itself, as long as it's at that strategic policy direction. So I really appreciate what Leslie said.
Good. And then one thing that I'll add in as we wrap up here is that we also then need to be attentive to the accreditation components of the title of the committee.
Yeah.
Right now, we're in pretty good shape on accreditation, but that's a constant process. Like really is a process. Accreditation isn't a one-time thing. It really is an ongoing process. This was a super rich, interesting discussion. I'll be interested to see what Sasha is able to pull off in terms of minutes. Thank you very much, Sasha.
Speaking of which, I think we have some minutes to approve, don't we? We close?
Why don't
Or
we
you
just
wanna-
revisit those, and then we'll do both approvals of minutes until the next meeting. I think it would be useful if we could pencil in a next meeting. I think we've got everyone here, right?
And then if I may, trustee Gonzalez, I am going to be appointing trustee Gonzalez Brito to this committee.
Excellent.
She was just unable to make it today.
Okay, so I am also mindful that the faculty are going to be on break starting when?
Memorial Day weekend.
Right, but the finals are the week before. I would hope that we would
Exactly. So we hope
give
that we
them
would-
that, give
And
them that
so-
time.
When is the Memorial Day weekend?
Last
Sorry.
weekend of May.
I think it's the 29th.
Okay,
And so I think finals are the week of the 22nd, right, Leslie?
Yes.
what if
Yeah,
we
and then
looked
there's
at
graduations, right?
What if we looked at the 25th?
Well, there's graduations that day.
Oh, okay.
So I would say you would want to do it maybe like the week of
18th?
the 8th or the 15th at the latest.
Okay, could we look at the week of the 18th? Could we look at Thursday, the 18th at this time? Does that work for people?
So Thursdays are still a
At
little
what
bit
time?
difficult.
At 3. So if we could move up a bit, is that a possibility?
I can
Could
join
we-
by Zoom that day.
The Latinx graduation celebration is happening that day, by the way, starting at 3 o'clock, just a heads up.
Yeah, so what if we said noon?
I think Jamil Tier said she has negotiations on Thursdays.
Correct.
So that's always true, right? Thursdays?
And until we settled, yes.
Yeah. Well, so we can move it, are we suggesting a day other than Thursday?
Can everybody do Wednesday? The
What time?
17th?
I'm
Hmm.
sorry, I can't that week. I'm at a
on the 10th.
conference.
Could you
Oh.
zoom in?
That,
You're going to be tied up
I'm
at the
in a
conference.
conference.
Okay, so am I right now.
Yeah.
I left. Get here.
If you're still talking the week of the 15th through the 17th.
Huh,
Because
yeah,
right, Stephanie had originally said trying to do it the weeks of board meetings, which would be the week of the board meetings, the 9th, right?
well, so that'd be 2 weeks from now, and that would be our last meeting of this academic year then. I could do anything after, I'm tied up until 2:30. But I could finish that Zoom call here. And so I could do anything after 2:30 on that Wednesday, the 10th.
What about Friday, the 28th?
That's graduations, Laney College graduation at
Yeah,
11.
Friday, the 26th. Friday, the 26th is
Yeah,
Laney graduation.
yeah.
Oh, sorry, wrong day. We're looking in May, right? So Friday, the 26th. Oh, you're right. Okay.
So would the 10th work for folks?
In 2 weeks, the 10th
Correct.
at 3:00.
We have a parcel tax citizens oversight committee, so I'll have to be at that. But that, if everyone else can go on, then that's fine too.
What
What
time
about
is your
1
meeting,
o'clock?
Stephanie?
It's really hard to do it this way. Could we just send out a doodle poll? Because I really need my full calendar in front of me,
Yeah,
because I have so many standing meetings.
yeah. So I'm going to request again that constituent bodies appoint an alternate. Because this is really hard, trying to figure out everybody all at once at the same time, So I am requesting again that you go back to your bodies and ask for an alternate so that we can do this.
And then maybe moving forward, Nikki, for the next academic year, we could have like a standing meeting and then everyone would know what that is coming up and then
Yep.
they could work around it.
And either choose to be on the committee or not.
Right, based on that, yeah.
Based on that thing. So, Jamil, do you think that it might be possible for you to find an alternate so that we could go on the 18th, which I think works for everybody except for you?
I definitely can ask, and I think if you guys hit quorum without me, that also works.
Okay,
So
I super value your voice though.
absolutely.
So can we pencil in 2 to 3:30 on Thursday, the 18th?
Sure.
Okay. Sorry.
I thought we were going to try and move it earlier.
Yeah. Where is that graduation? At Laney. So if we're done by 2:30, so could we go 1 to 2:30 on the 18th?
Yeah.
1 to 2:30. And Jamil, see if you can find somebody who you trust and like so that you're talking with them.
Absolutely. I will
Of
do
course,
that.
this could be mutually exclusive.
All right. Thank you, people. We're done.
Thank you for your
Thank
leadership,
you.
Nikki. This has been really great and I look forward to continuing with the conversations.